Taylor Swift and Virginia GOP gubernatorial candidate Greg Youngkin have bad blood. And Democratic candidate Terry McAuliffe has dropped a 5-figure digital ad targeting Youngkin for his role in Swift's very public spat with Carlyle Group, a private equity group that purchased the masters to her biggest hits in 2019, despite her public protests. Youngkin was co-CEO of Carlyle at the time of the sale.
The ad rollout began yesterday on Facebook, Google, and Instagram. It will micro-target users who Google Swift's name or like and engage with the singer's content on social media. Here to discuss is former National Press Secretary for the Sanders campaign and co-host of Bad Faith podcast, Briahna Joy Gray. Welcome, Briahna.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And so, Briahna, how cheap is this? Do they have Youngkin nailed on this, or is this a total gimmick from old T-Mac?
Look, from what I understand, the race is very, very close, and there's a struggle to identify who swing voters or who persuadable voters are even going to be. They've been locked in a sort of a dead heat with McAuliffe a little bit ahead, but given what the polling information is like, this seems like the first bite of the apple that Republicans have to take the governor's office back in over a decade. So I'm not surprised that McAuliffe's team is pulling out all of the stops, hoping to appeal to perhaps a younger audience that might not otherwise turn out or have the same incentives to vote by capitalizing on what was, at a time, a very big controversy in Swiftie world.
Isn't the youth vote will save us like the worst plan ever always? Isn't that even
Do young people even listen to Taylor Swift? She's practically oldies at this point, isn't she?
I mean, okay, first of all.
You need to calm down.
It is true that she's not exactly long in the tooth. Her, kind of most acclaimed album, perhaps, 1989, is a nod to her birth year, so she's solidly in her 30s at this point. However, she still has a grip on a younger contingent of more youthful millennials, and I think some Gen Z probably care when an album launches as well. But to your point, yeah, I do think that kind of making a bid for the youth is a last grasp of desperation. Obviously, I'm having flashbacks to the Bernie campaign, when at times I wish that we would do less flouting of how many young people liked us and do more reaching out to older voters. However, I also don't think it's ever a bad idea to hit all your marks. I think it's smart not to leave any potential votes on the table. The question is whether or not this ends up actually drawing people out or making McAuliffe look like he's in a little bit of a desperate situation.
And just by the way, isn't McAuliffe also kind of tied in some way to this Carlyle Group?
No question, he's got to be. He's got to be.
Well, my understanding was that his campaign is that he was a passive investor and that his investments were no longer. He was no longer invested by the time the Swift masters were purchased. But I'm not personally sure how much that is a credible way to distance oneself from this issue.
I mean, I'm sure he was not consulted about the Taylor Swift masters. I'm sure this was probably not him. I don't know what role Youngkin himself, would have played in this either. But actually, when Taylor Swift did her 1989 tour, I went with my daughter and saw her at the Nats Park in D.C., which I think is strong evidence of a lack of hipness of Taylor Swift at this point. If I was
in the audience,
if I was there, but when it comes to this gubernatorial race, people might be sleeping on this a little bit. So in early November, right around the corner, this election is going to come, and if Democrats haven't finished, I want to get your take on this. If Democrats haven't finished their reconciliation process and passed it into law by that point, and by some chance a Republican wins in Virginia, what do you think the effect of that could be on the congressional Democrats? Do you think the wheels will just kind of come off their agenda at that point?
I think that's kind of presuming that the wheels haven't already come off the Democratic Party agenda. Look, we are 9 going on 10 months, 9 months into the Biden presidency. We were told off the bat that progressives needed to sit down and be quiet and give him time to affect his policy agenda. Now we're this far into it, and we're for the first time seeing progressives try to hold the line and extract some concessions, not for a progressive agenda, mind you, but for Joe Biden's own agenda and big ticket agenda items that Joe Biden centered in his own campaign and Joe Biden ran on, like a $15 minimum wage, were abandoned by the wayside back in March of this year. We haven't heard a peep about it since, right? And so the idea that the Virginia gubernatorial race is going to be the death knell to the Biden agenda, when he's already kind of dug his own grave for that in many respects by refusing to have a real conversation about filibuster reform, refusing to show any backbone with respect to pushing back against the unelected parliamentarian figure who has become the foil for all of the Democratic Party's ineptitude. It's hard for me to get my heckles raised for whatever's happening in Virginia when the real problem is what's happening right down the street on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah, and Virginia was a red state, and the growth of the sort of federal bureaucracy, the amount of federal workers who commute to D.C., they live in Virginia, I think part of the story for why it turned. A significant part of the story for why it turned blue in statewide races. That obviously that phenomenon is not about to reverse itself, but it still it could theoretically be close enough that you could have a surprise win for the challenger.
Yeah, we'll see if there's enough people angry about Taylor Swift and what happened to her catalog to come out in early November.
She's a very polarizing figure. I wouldn't be surprised to see if it actually had some kind of result.
Every vote counts. Brianna, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
Next on Rising, media reporter Jeremy Barr joins us to discuss the controversy surrounding the implosion of Ozy Media.